Productive Pastor 26, why I have multiple to-do lists. What's going on, friends? Chad's here, Productive Pastor, episode 26. We're going to talk about why I have multiple to-do lists. And you might be saying, Chad, are you crazy? Why do you have multiple to-do lists? Well, we're going to talk about that. Before we jump into that, just one thing I want to put in your ear is this. I changed the format a couple months back of the Productive Pastor emails. And this episode today is kind of going to be like what we're talking about all month long in the emails, this idea of understanding the relationship between time and energy and the tasks and the things that we have to do. But I would love for you to get those emails. And if you're not getting those emails yet, you can sign up for the email list over at the show notes, revchadbrooks.com/PPP/026, or other folks or other places where you see me talk about this around the internet. But I want you to be able to kind of dig in to these sorts of things, because I think it's a very, very helpful thing as pastors, as we now are kind of learning how to manage not just the things we do, but our emotional health, our spiritual health, our mental health, how all these things are in relationship to our work. And we're used to talking about that in like negative terms, but I think when you talk about that and think about that in positive terms, because what I have seen, I'm going to talk about today, is that there is a positive relationship to the way that we do things that can just be a healing balm for our soul. We will use a little churchy language there because this is the Productive Pastor podcast, so we can assume some spiritual stuff there. So that's what I want you to do. If you don't get those emails already, cruise over to the show notes, revchadbrooks.com/PPP/026. Sign up for those emails so you can kind of get the rest of this, what's going on. But we're here to talk today about why I have multiple to-do lists, and let's just go on and get in with this. So the first thing is this. I have this grand assumption that leads me and has led me for years from the moment that I read something. But I have this big assumption, and this is my big assumption, that finishing things makes us feel better. And all of this comes from an article in Harvard Business Review. It's over 10 years old now, and I read it ages ago, and it made so much sense to me. And I'm at the point now where I will say this is a baseline assumption for me, that finishing things makes us feel better. The article is called The Power of Small Wins. I've got it linked in the show notes if you want to read it. I talked about this article a lot. If you've been around the podcast for a while, you've heard me talk about it. But it talks about the progress principle. It's about the study they did about how people self-described having a good day. And it had nothing to do with relationships or workplace emotions or busyness or unbusyness, all that sort of thing. It was all about them saying, they could have had like the worst day on earth. Like their coworkers could have like put an air horn under their seat and ate all their lunch. But they would say, I had a good day when I made progress on something meaningful. As I say, this is an underlying assumption. I know it to be true for me. And for me, and like I said, this is just for me, I've learned when I'm able to knock things off of my list, my to-do list, and I make forward motion, that it affects me in a positive way. That I'm more relaxed, I'm able to be more fulfilled in what I'm doing, all of those sorts of things. Now, this isn't just about getting more done. That might have been something I would have told you years ago. But y'all know that my productivity journey over the last 10 years has been one that has just changed dramatically. And I think that when years ago, it might have been about just like getting more things done, like hacking the day to get more accomplished. But, I'm old now. I'm 42, and I've learned my lessons there. So this isn't just about getting a bunch of stuff done, but it's about the idea of saying, I have finished something. Because in ministry, finishing things is a whole other ballgame. If you're preaching weekly, the sermon gets finished, and when it gets finished is a different story altogether, but the work doesn't seem to be done. That's why I've heard from so many pastors why they love hobbies where they finish things, where they're building something, they're working with wood, they're hunting, they're fishing, they're playing golf, they're doing things that have a finishing component. Because we need that. And so everybody, this idea of the progress principle applies to any vocation out there. But for ministry, in a job where things just don't finish a lot, I feel like it's more important. I also believe in having a very small priority to-do list. Why? Well, because I don't have 8 hours a day to just get things done, just like you. Like, you don't walk into the office at whatever time you walk into the office and leave 8 hours after having 8 hours of privacy. I pastor 2 churches part-time. I coach people. I host several online learning cohorts. I have various administrative and managerial tasks that are part of my job, and I have all the other things that are just part of my life. And so having some massive to-do list would be incredibly depressing. Now, it doesn't mean I don't have an awareness of the things that are in front of me, but every day I intentionally choose a few that I know are the most important. And those things get the best of me. They generally fall under these headings. I'll have a single task that is important. I'll have a task that might be related to a larger segment or a project. I might have a piece of critical communication. And that's the thing, is like, no matter how haywire or cattywampus the day can get, and even though my situation's different now, it can still get cattywampus and haywire pretty easily. I have that list and say, this is what I'm going to finish up today, no matter what. And that's really it. And I try to not have more than 3 or 4 things on there. Because remember, my primary assumption is the idea and the power of that small wins article. It's, meaningful progress on things. And I know for sure that if these handful of things are done each day, then I'm able to stop working easily at the end of the day. So, I have made meaningful progress on what I need to get done, and I will take the win, and I will finish the day, and I will come back in my office here at the house on the next day and start again. But I keep these things, and it isn't all of the stuff I have to do. I've got tons of stuff to do. I've got all sorts of weird lists and things like that, but I keep them sorted. They're in Trello. They're either in my weekly spread, or they're saved as part of a larger project management tool. But I focus on that short to-do list of just 3 or 4 things a day. That's what matters to me. Now, you might be saying, Chad, but what about when things get kind of haywire or cattywampus, as you said earlier? Yeah, this is ministry. Things happen. I've got folks to take care of. I've got these sorts of things. There's other crises that pop up. There's things around the house. Like earlier this week, I was supposed to be doing a lot of production work, and we had to have air conditioning repair guys in the house all day long, and so that didn't happen. Crazy stuff happens. And the first thing I do about that is I talked about in the last episode 25, of why I schedule to 80%. And I'm intentional about building margin in during the week for whatever adaptations or responses come up that I didn't or I can't expect. And I'm telling you, my friends, the 80% is a secret weapon. So if an emergency happens, or a pastoral emergency, any of those sorts of things, it's not a big deal. And that 80% idea, it almost means leaving an entire day of margin into my weekly schedule. So I've got the space right there to be adaptable. So let's call that that is the prerequisite for this conversation, is that idea of scheduling to 80%. Now, you also might be saying, but Chad, I thought this was about multiple to-do lists. And right now it sounds like you're trying to keep as little as possible going on, and you have one little short, small to-do list. Yeah, that's an honest question. Maybe, but part of that 80% schedule also means scheduling for when you mentally, emotionally, or spiritually just hit a tough spot and things begin to go south. Sometimes the haywire or cattywampus is you, my friend, and that's okay. And you might need to take a little bit of time, and that's okay. The 80% enables that. But sometimes, that can't happen. Sometimes you're in a place where you need to do some work, or you have to do some work, or it's just a really funky, like you had a lunch meeting you thought would be very different, and you come back to the office and you're just really dejected, and it kind of changed your emotional state, all those sorts of things. See, that's where this multiple to-do list kicks in. So I wrote an article this summer. I have links in the show notes, and it was called this, How Multiple To-Do Lists Might Be Good for Your Mental Health. That link's there. And this is really, I want to dig a little bit deeper into this concept on this episode, and then digging deeper into it over the emails this month. And I'm going to tell you, this is like productivity 301. Okay, this is junior and senior level kind of content, because you have to have a handle on discipline, on just personal discipline. But more than that, you need to have a really good sense of self-awareness and an understanding of your mental space and your energy. So, what I'm about to share with you is the 301, but you can get the 101 and the 201 back in the season 1 workbook. It builds up some of those muscles, but we're going deep here. I like to say that you need 3 different spaces inside of your vocational life, but also your emotional life. Other people have talked about these in different ways. Carey Nieuwhof in his book, At Your Best, uses language of green, yellow, and red zones. I like to talk about developing, dealing, and draining. 3 levels of task: developing, dealing, and draining. I've talked about these before, but this is a developing task is one to where you are finding new and more identity. It's not just something you're good at or something you like doing, but you are growing as a pastor, and as a leader, and as a person when you are doing these developing level tasks. The dealing task, I can do these things. This is within my scope. It's not a big deal. I might not get really excited about doing it, but I can do this, and it doesn't drain me. And that leads us into the 3rd level tasks, draining tasks. These are the tasks where if you're doing these, and if you have to stay in that space long enough, you're going to be losing yourself. Your identity is going to be drained out of you. Now, we're all grown-ups here, and we all have things we have to do. We all have those tasks that are just part of ministry. I had a superintendent one time who told me, hey, Chad, sometimes you just have to go to work. We all have things we don't like to do, but think about that. If I am doing this sort of thing for a long enough run, I'm going to be losing myself inside of this. And you really should know what parts of your current work, vocational reality fit into these. What are the parts of ministry you need to focus on and take care of when you were your absolute best? I really think people should be doing sermon work as a developing idea. You should be at your best whenever you're working on that. But also an awareness of, hey, these are the things I'm doing that are dealing. These are the things I have to do sometimes that are draining, and I'm going to be aware of this. And this is where I developed this practice. I was in the middle of a really, really gnarly season of ministry a little while back, and I wasn't satisfied with work, and I'm making air quotes right here. I was not satisfied with work whatsoever, because I was in the middle of both having to work outside of my strengths, which meant being in a tough spot, but also things were not getting finished because what I was doing was work that never seemed to be finished, and I was having to live like just the bottom end of myself. I was completely in drain mode here. I was not seeing whatsoever at all what the HBR article calls making progress in a meaningful way. And friends, there's no stress like being at the bottom of your life emotionally and having to do things that you really need to be at your best. That was where I found myself. I was just mentally and emotionally exhausted, and I was having to lead at this wildly high capacity level, and I was not able to just get all of those lines to be talking to each other. And so one day I just stopped. I shut down, and I began thinking, and I began sorting through all of my tasks. And at that point in time, one of the things I was just draining, I was just overwhelmed with, was a massive amount of just repetitive administrative things to make sure it was going. It was overly complicated, and I will take full responsibility for the overcomplication in those spaces. But that was going on, so I had to just stop and chill out for a moment and think about that. Now, this is what I learned. I knew that my mind, that I was okay mid to late afternoon, about 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock, I'm in a pretty decent space. I can get some things done, especially, put the Delvon Lamar organ trio, get a little funk going on. I can hammer out some administrative stuff there. I knew that I was absolutely best in my mornings, especially early. And I knew that I was ruined after lunch most of the time for a couple of hours. So that was going on. So I began to think about my day and how my day worked. And I began sorting out the to-dos based off of what would it require of me and when was I in the best space to do it. So it wasn't just energy and it wasn't mentally, but thinking, okay, Chad, you've got a bunch of stuff to file and categorize, that sort of thing. You can be brain dead while you do that. So every day when you come back to the office from lunch, you're going to do filing. But you can write emails, you can do communication stuff, that sort of thing, late afternoon. Yes, it's extremely important to do that. And some of those tasks were priority level tasks, but I say, hey, I'm not going to do this until late afternoon. I'm going to focus my message work and these handful of things that I know are just mission critical for the church at those moments. And I'm going to step into the office and do those absolutely first thing. I'm not going to have any meetings first thing, that sort of stuff. And so I began realizing, okay, I need to sort all of these big, huge things into these multiple to-do lists. And I'm going to give myself permission to really just knock out a block a day. So I hit my 3 or 4, and that's going on. But then there was also, and the progress principle began to work because I was giving myself permission to feel like I did, saying, yeah, you've got a tough day, a tough few hours, whatever, but you need to get a few things done because it will help you feel better. And it did. I could say, yeah, I had a trash day, but I spent a few hours going through some low emotion tasks and projects. And hey, let me tell you what, we're further along because think about it, every project has the boring, dull, mundane stuff that you don't want to do, but don't you end up putting it off all the time because it's not very exciting, and therefore the project drags out even further and further? So I learned, man, I can really take advantage of this time and just say, hey, you don't have to write a sermon right now. You don't have to film a video. You don't have to do these mission critical things. Just go in there and edit the database, man. Or it could be, I had this fantastic, great day, and I was in this amazing place mentally and spiritually, and I was really able to hone in on things. And during the time where I was normally kind of not really there or just okay, I still stayed in a good zone, and I made amazing forward motion on stuff. It's that was the beginnings of this, but then I also realized, hey, you have some sort of an interaction, or you get an email, or there's some sort of a setback or whatever, and you have that bummed, when you just want to go shut your door in your office and not deal with it. I learned that rather than sitting there for an hour or something like that and just disassociating, okay, Chad, you can feel bad, but we need to take care of these 1 or 2 things while you're doing it. Because, friends, the progress principle, and I know this might not be the same for you, but for me, it was a huge, huge turn in the way that I was able to just to breathe deeply, because these things, they leave you satisfied. And so if this is intriguing, let me give you a couple of action points. I don't want to drop you off here to say, okay, if you want to put this into practice, go to the emails. I'm not going to leave you hanging like that. We will go highly deep and highly practical over the next few weeks about this idea, but a couple of quick tips for how you can think about this. The first thing is you need to know when you're at your best. Think through those times where you are developing, dealing, or draining. Begin understanding what those times are and realize they might not be the exact same every single day. For me, Mondays, I rarely am at my best on a Monday because it was a long Sunday, that sort of a thing. But get a handle on when those times are for you. The second thing is this: get a handle on your task list. Do a time audit. If you've never done one of those before, I've got a free tool for that. I'll drop it in the show notes. But begin sorting out those things that you do into those categories of draining, dealing, and developing, especially if you have repetitive tasks that have to get taken care of every day, every week, that sort of a thing. And this is what you do. You've got your times when you're at your best, your times when you're okay, your times when you're not okay. You've got the tasks that you love to do, that you're great at doing, the tasks that you can do, and those tasks that are really a drag. Start matching them up now. But know that if you find yourself in some sort of extended mental state, whether you're hey, I'm just kind of okay all day long, or I'm great for a longer period than anticipated, or vice versa, where you have just a bad day or even a bad week, you can redirect the way that you're focusing on things, pull into the corresponding task list, and then build those priority tasks out of that. So this is not just to waste time. This is also not just a way to get a bunch of stuff done and justify yourself saying, I'm the most productive pastor in the world. But because of the progress principle, you can think of these task lists as a meaningful way that your spirit can change. And then you can come home in a better mood, or you can have a better approach to ministry. You begin thinking about, hey, okay, I'm about to step into some sort of a meeting that means I need to absolutely be at my best. And so let me preserve some of that best energy. Let me make sure, saying, hey, it's 2 o'clock. I've got a 7 o'clock meeting that I'm going to need to be just rock solid for. I'm going to go home and not do all the stuff that kind of makes me feel crummy for a few hours. Like, how many times have you done that? Like, stay at the church waiting for a meeting and ended up doing something that put you in a worse space for it. So, friends, know your tasks, know how you approach things, and just match them up. I'm Chad, Productive Pastor. It's always a joy and privilege to be in your ears for these conversations. Can't wait to come back to you next moment. But if you like this, share it with a friend. Come hang out in the Productivity Party in the community on Facebook, and I will see you back in the next episode.